When you picture ancient Egypt, your mind probably floods with pyramids stabbing the sky like giant stone Wi-Fi towers. The Sphinx giving you that eternal, I know something you don't, look, and pharaohs wearing enough gold to make Mr. T look underdressed. These are history's blockbuster hits, monuments so over the top they make you wonder if gravity just took a vacation. But here's my question for you. If you could wander ancient Egypt for a day, would you rather explore the pyramids, meet a pharaoh, or try not to get cursed by the Sphinx? But what if the most profound legacy of the ancient Egyptians wasn't built of stone? What if their most world-altering creations weren't tombs for the dead, but tools for the living? For every pyramid that consumed the labor of a generation, there were a dozen quieter, humbler innovations being perfected in the workshops and fields along the Nile. These weren't things designed to impress the gods. They were things designed to solve the infuriatingly practical problems of being human. These inventions were so successful, so elegantly simple, that they've become part of the very furniture of our own lives. They are the invisible architecture of the modern world, hiding in plain sight like the plumbing in your walls or the electricity in your outlets. We use them every day, rarely stopping to think that the fundamental concepts were worked out by people 4,000 years ago who were dealing with the same basic challenges we are: how to manage time, how to share information, how to stay healthy, and of course, how to look good while doing it. So let's pull back the curtain of gold and mystique. Let's look past the mummies and the mythology and explore 5 ancient Egyptian inventions that didn't just build an empire, they laid the foundation for our own world. These are the ideas that truly achieved immortality, not by being sealed in a tomb, but by being so useful they could never be forgotten. Chapter 1. The calendar, taming the tyranny of time. Before the Egyptians got their hands on it, time was a slippery, unpredictable beast. It was a chaotic jumble of moons and seasons, governed by the whims of nature and the rough approximations of human memory. Planning for the future was like trying to nail jelly to a wall. You knew winter was coming, eventually. You knew the river would flood, probably. But when, exactly? An entire civilization's survival depended on knowing when to plant, when to harvest, and when to get the heck out of the way of the Nile's annual, life-giving, but also rather destructive deluge. The moon was the obvious first choice for a timekeeper. It was big, bright, and went through its phases with a comforting regularity that seemed almost designed for human convenience. The problem was, the moon is a terrible accountant. A lunar year, based on 12 full moon cycles, is about 354 days long. The solar year, the time it takes for the Earth to actually make one full trip around the sun, is 365.25 days. That 11-day gap doesn't sound like much, but over a few years, it adds up like compound interest. Your calendar might be telling you it's time to plant, while the weather is telling you you're a fool for listening. It was like having a watch that lost 10 minutes every hour. Eventually, it becomes worse than useless. The Egyptians, being the keen observers they were, noticed something else. Every year, just before the Nile began to swell its banks and transform the landscape, the brightest star in the night sky, Sirius, would appear on the eastern horizon just before sunrise. This celestial event, known as the heliacal rising of Sirius, was the universe's own alarm clock. It was a signal, as reliable as the sun itself, that the season of inundation was about to begin. It was the ultimate, your feet are about to get wet warning, delivered with astronomical precision. This was the key. By tying their calendar to the sun and the stars, not the fickle moon, the Egyptians created the first 365-day calendar in history. They organized it with a beautiful mathematical simplicity that would make a modern project manager weep with joy. The year was divided into 3 seasons of 4 months each, based on the agricultural cycle that governed their lives. Akhet, the season of inundation when the Nile overflowed its banks. Pere, the season of growth and planting when the waters receded. And Shemu, the season of harvest when the crops were gathered. Each month had exactly 30 days. It was clean, it was predictable, it was elegant. Of course, if you've been doing the math, you'll notice that 12 months of 30 days only adds up to 360. The Egyptians weren't sloppy. They accounted for the missing 5 days by adding them at the very end of the year. These were known as the epagomenal days, and they were a time for festivals, celebrations, and probably a fair bit of anxiety about what the new year might bring. These 5 days were considered to be outside the normal run of time, a bit like that weird, lawless week between Christmas and New Year's where no one is entirely sure what day it is or whether calories count. This system was a monumental leap forward. For the first time in human history, a government could accurately plan for the future. They could predict the harvest, calculate taxes, and organise massive public works projects, like, say, building a pyramid or 2, with a degree of confidence that was previously unimaginable. It allowed farmers to work in harmony with the river, ensuring a food surplus that fueled the entire civilization. It was the difference between being a victim of nature and being its partner. Today, the calendar that hangs on your wall or sits on your phone is a direct descendant of this ancient Egyptian system. The 365-day year, the 12-month structure, it's all there. The Egyptians didn't just invent a way to mark time. They gave us the framework to understand and control it. They took the chaotic, flowing river of time and channeled it into a predictable, life-giving system. And they did it so well that 4,000 years later, we're still living by their rules. Chapter 2. Papyrus and Ink. The original information superhighway. Having a calendar is great, but it's not much use if you have to carve it into a 30-ton block of granite every year. Before the Egyptians, writing was a heavy-duty business. You could chisel your thoughts into stone, which was permanent, but not exactly portable. It was the ancient equivalent of trying to send a text message with a sledgehammer. Or you could press marks into wet clay tablets, which was faster, but the result was bulky, fragile, and prone to crumbling at the worst possible moment. It was like trying to build a library out of crackers. This was a major bottleneck for civilization. Ideas, laws, stories, and records could only move as fast as a donkey could haul a cart full of rocks. An empire couldn't be run on stone tablets. You couldn't send a quick memo to the governor of a distant province if the memo weighed more than the messenger. What they needed was a new medium, something light, flexible, and easy to produce. They needed paper. And so they invented it. Or, at least, they invented the next best thing, a material so revolutionary it would hold a monopoly on the written word for 3,000 years. It came from a humble reed called papyrus, which grew in dense, swampy thickets along the banks of the Nile. To most people, it was just part of the scenery, another bit of green in the endless tapestry of the river valley. To the Egyptians, it was a miracle of natural engineering waiting to happen. The process of turning this reedy plant into a writing surface was a stroke of genius. First, they harvested the stalks and peeled away the tough, green outer layer. Then, they sliced the soft, white pith inside into thin, ribbon-like strips. These strips were laid side by side on a flat surface, slightly overlapping like the slats of a fence. A second layer was then added on top, running at a right angle to the first. It was like weaving a placemat out of plant guts. This double-layered sheet was then hammered or pressed, squashing the strips together. The natural, sugary sap of the plant itself acted as a glue, bonding the fibers into a single, cohesive sheet. After drying in the Egyptian sun, the result was a smooth, pale, and surprisingly durable writing surface. It was papyrus. This wasn't just a new page, it was a new paradigm. For the first time in human history, information was light. It was portable. You could write a letter, a legal contract, or a laundry list, roll it up, and tuck it under your arm. You could create scrolls, joining sheet after sheet to create long documents. The Great Harris Papyrus, for example, is over 130 feet long. Imagine trying to do that with stone. You'd need a quarry and a small army. Of course, a revolutionary writing surface needs a revolutionary writing fluid to go with it. Carving was out. What they needed was something that could be applied quickly and would stay put. They needed ink. The Egyptians were brilliant chemists, and they mixed up the world's first durable, carbon-based black ink. The recipe was simple but effective. They took soot, scraped from the bottom of cooking pots or oil lamps, and mixed it with a binder, like vegetable gum or beeswax, and a little bit of water. The result was a rich, dark ink that flowed smoothly from a reed pen and bonded permanently with the papyrus fibers. It was so good, in fact, that the writing on thousands of years old papyri is often still perfectly crisp and legible today, which is more than you can say for most modern printer ink. The combination of papyrus and ink was the ancient world's killer app. It unleashed an information explosion. The machinery of the state could now run on a river of documents. Scribes, the highly trained IT support of their day, could record everything: tax records, census data, court proceedings, military orders. Knowledge that had once been the exclusive property of a few priests or nobles could now be recorded, copied, and shared. Medical texts detailed surgical procedures with clinical precision. Literary works, from epic poems to love songs, could be written down, preserving the culture's soul. This was the birth of the document. It was the beginning of bureaucracy, of libraries, of archives. It was the moment when history stopped being something you just remembered and started being something you could read. Every time you pick up a book, sign a contract, or even just scribble a note on a piece of paper, you are participating in a tradition that began in the marshes of the Nile. Chapter 3. Eye makeup. More than just a pretty face. In the modern world, makeup is often seen as a tool of vanity, a way to enhance our features or cover up our flaws. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry built on the promise of beauty and the fear of aging. But for the ancient Egyptians, cosmetics were something far more profound. They were a fusion of fashion, medicine, and magic, all rolled into one elegant package. And it all started with that iconic, heavy-lidded gaze that has stared out from tomb paintings and statues for millennia. Both men and women in ancient Egypt, from the lowliest labourer to the pharaoh himself, wore makeup. The most distinctive element was the thick, dark eyeliner known as kohl. They would grind up minerals like galena, a lead sulfide, into a fine powder and mix it with oil or animal fat to create a paste. This was then applied around the eyes with a small stick, creating that dramatic, almond-shaped look that has become synonymous with ancient Egypt. It was the original smoky eye, and it was non-negotiable. Going out without your kohl on was like leaving the house without your shoes. It just wasn't done. On the surface, this was about beauty. The Egyptians had a strong aesthetic sense, and they believed the dark liner made the eyes look larger, more expressive, and more beautiful. It was a fashion statement, a way of accentuating the feature they considered to be the window to the soul. But this was Egypt, and nothing was ever that simple. The kohl eyeliner was also a highly practical piece of personal protective equipment. Imagine living next to a giant, sun-drenched desert. The glare from the sand is relentless, bouncing off every surface like a permanent snowstorm of light. The Egyptians figured out that the dark coal acted like a natural pair of sunglasses, absorbing the harsh sunlight and reducing the glare. It was the same principle that modern athletes use when they smudge black paint under their eyes. It was anti-glare technology for your face. Furthermore, the desert is a dusty, windy place, and the Nile attracts swarms of flies. The Egyptians believed the coal liner acted as a physical barrier, trapping sand and repelling insects that could carry nasty eye infections like trachoma, a leading cause of blindness in the ancient world. But the protection didn't stop there. This is where medicine and magic blur together in that uniquely Egyptian way. The lead-based compounds in the coal, while toxic in large doses, had a surprising side effect in the small quantities they were using. When the makeup came into contact with the moisture of the eyes, it triggered an immune response, stimulating the production of nitric oxide in the body. Nitric oxide is a powerful antibacterial agent. In essence, their makeup was jump-starting their immune system, helping them fight off the very eye infections they were trying to prevent. They were, completely by accident, practicing a form of preventative medicine. They didn't stop at black. They also created green eyeshadow by grinding up malachite, a copper ore. This was often applied to the lower eyelid or as a brow colour. It was a complete cosmetic toolkit. They had palettes for grinding and mixing their colours, elegant little pots for storing them, and slender applicators made of wood, ivory or bone. Today, the global cosmetics industry is a direct heir to this tradition. The eyeliner, the eyeshadow, the very idea of using colour to enhance the eyes. It all traces back to the banks of the Nile. But the Egyptians remind us that makeup was once something more than just decoration. It was a tool for survival, a form of medicine, and a connection to the divine. It was a testament to their ingenuity and their belief that beauty and protection were two sides of the same coin. Chapter 4. The Shaduf, the original leveraged buyout of water. The Nile was the lifeblood of Egypt, a divine gift that turned a swath of barren desert into a ribbon of impossible green. Its annual flood was a miracle of natural fertilization, depositing a fresh layer of rich black silt across the fields each year. But this miracle had a strict schedule. For much of the year, the river retreated, sinking low between its banks, leaving the fields high, dry and thirsty under a blistering sun. The crops, and by extension the people, were dying for a drink. Getting the water from the low-lying river to the high-lying fields was a problem of pure brute force. For centuries, it meant an endless, soul-crushing parade of farmers hauling heavy clay pots or leather buckets up steep, muddy banks, one agonizing trip at a time. It was inefficient, exhausting, and a terrible waste of human energy. An entire civilization's potential was being held hostage by the sheer inconvenience of gravity. There had to be a better way, and there was. It wasn't a complex machine of gears and pumps. It was something far more elegant, a device of such beautiful simplicity that it feels less like an invention and more like a discovery of a fundamental truth. It was called the Shaduf. The Shaduf is, in essence, a seesaw for water. It consists of a long wooden pole balanced on a central pivot. On the short end, you have a heavy counterweight, a big rock, a lump of clay, whatever was handy and heavy. On the long end, dangling from a rope, is a bucket. That's it. No moving parts to break. No complex instructions to follow. No maintenance manual thicker than a phone book. It was a machine powered by basic physics and a little bit of human guidance. The operation was a graceful, rhythmic dance. A single farmer would stand near the river, grab the long pole, and pull the empty bucket down into the water. The counterweight on the other end would rise into the air like a slow-motion ballet. Once the bucket was full, the farmer simply let go. The heavy counterweight would then do all the work, dropping down and effortlessly lifting the full, heavy bucket of water up to the level of the irrigation ditch. The farmer's job was just to guide it, to swing the pole around, and to tip the water into the channel that would carry it out into the thirsty fields. Pull down, guide up, tip over, repeat. It was like having a tireless, perfectly balanced partner who insisted on doing all the heavy lifting. This simple device utterly transformed Egyptian agriculture. It was a force multiplier. A single person with a Shaduf could lift more water in an hour than a team of workers could by hand, and with a fraction of the effort. This new efficiency meant that farmers could cultivate land that had previously been too high or too far from the river. More importantly, it allowed for year-round irrigation, enabling a second, and sometimes even a third, growing season. The food surplus exploded. The genius of the Shaduf was its accessibility. It could be built in a day from locally sourced materials. A couple of sturdy tree branches, some rope, a bucket, and a rock. Any farmer could make one, and any farmer could fix one. It was a democratic technology, empowering individual communities and freeing them from dependence on massive state-controlled irrigation projects. And here's the most remarkable part. It's still here. Travel through rural Egypt today, or parts of India, and other agricultural communities around the world, and you can still see the Shaduf in action. The design has not changed in 4,000 years, because it doesn't need to. It is a perfect solution to a timeless problem. In an age of GPS-guided tractors and automated irrigation systems, this ancient, elegant lever continues its quiet, rhythmic work. Chapter 5. Surgical Instruments. The delicate art of staying alive. Life in the ancient world was a hazardous affair. A broken bone from a fall, a wound from a construction accident, or a battle injury could easily become a death sentence. Infection was a silent, invisible killer that stalked every injury. Faced with this brutal reality, most ancient cultures could offer little more than prayers and poultices. But the Egyptians once again took a different approach. They decided to fight back. They peered inside the human body, studied its mechanics, and developed a set of tools and techniques to fix it when it broke. We know this because of texts like the Edwin Smith Papyrus, a document so astonishing it feels like it fell out of a time machine. It's not a book of magical spells or divine incantations. It's a clinical, methodical medical textbook. It describes 48 cases of traumatic injury, from skull fractures to spinal injuries, and for each one, it provides a diagnosis, a prognosis, and a step-by-step treatment plan. It is the voice of a rational, scientific mind at work 3,500 years ago. But a surgeon, no matter how brilliant, is only as good as their tools. And the Egyptians developed a surprisingly sophisticated surgical kit. Carvings on temple walls depict neat rows of instruments that look unnervingly familiar to a modern surgeon. There were scalpels for making incisions, forceps for grabbing and holding tissue, clamps for staunching blood flow, and fine needles for stitching up wounds. They even had bone saws for amputations and drills for relieving pressure on the brain. These instruments were typically made of bronze, a material that could be sharpened to a fine edge and, crucially, could be sterilized. The Egyptians understood the importance of cleanliness. Their medical texts speak of washing wounds with water and treating them with honey. Honey is a natural antiseptic, a fact that modern science has only recently rediscovered. Consider the act of trepanation, the drilling of a hole in the skull. It sounds like something out of a horror movie, but in ancient Egypt, it was a life-saving procedure. A blow to the head could cause the brain to swell, creating deadly pressure inside the rigid confines of the skull. By carefully drilling a small opening, an Egyptian surgeon could relieve that pressure. And we know they were successful because we have found skulls of patients who survived the procedure, with the bone showing clear signs of healing around the surgical hole. They developed specialized splints for setting broken bones and designed the world's first known prosthetics. The Egyptian surgeon was a respected, highly trained professional. They understood anatomy, they understood the importance of observation, and they were not afraid to intervene. They were the original pioneers of emergency medicine, working in a world without anesthesia, without antibiotics, without a modern understanding of germ theory. And yet, they saved lives. Every time a modern surgeon makes a clean incision, closes a wound with neat sutures, or sets a broken bone, they are following in the footsteps of these ancient Egyptian doctors. The tools have changed, the materials have improved, but the fundamental spirit of the craft, the courage to cut into the human body in order to heal it, was born in the medical schools and clinics of the Nile Valley. From the grand cosmic order of the calendar to the intimate personal art of makeup, the legacy of ancient Egypt is woven into the very fabric of our daily lives. Their pyramids may draw our awe, but it is their practical, problem-solving genius that has truly stood the test of time. They didn't just build for eternity, they built for humanity. They looked at the chaos of the natural world and found order. They looked at the limitations of the human body and found ways to transcend them. They took the raw materials around them, a humble river reed, a common mineral, a simple rock, and transformed them into tools that would shape the course of civilization. Their inventions weren't just clever gadgets, they were answers to fundamental human needs. So the next time you check the date, write a note, or even just glance in the mirror. Take a moment to remember the ancient innovators on the banks of the Nile. They were the original architects of the modern world, and their quiet, brilliant legacy is all around us, still working, still inspiring, still shaping our lives, 4,000 years later.